One of the most famous Scottish novels is Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson, a tale of adventure and excitement set in 17th century Scotland. But strangely, it has a title that could have described some of Celtic's historic transfers. Back in the late 1800s, claims of abduction and kidnapping were often right at the heart of transfer news. And one particular Celtic story reads like something out of a spy novel, replete with betrayal, threats, and secret journeys. Until 1893, Scottish football was not officially professional. This meant that players could not be paid or sign an official contract, although, in reality, under-the-counter payments were commonly used. It also meant that the only way a player could be tied to a side was for them to play in a competition, after which that man would not be able to appear for another team in the same tournament. Over the years, when various Celts came to the club, the team that the player had left cried foul about Celtic's tactics, although sometimes these were used to hurt the boys too. One such example was a night visit made by a Celtic party to secure the signing of defender Jerry Reynolds, spiriting him away from Carfin under the cover of darkness. Another tale claims that Johnny Madden, Celtic's first ever centre-forward, had gone to Sheffield to sign for Wednesday, before a Catholic priest in the city tracked him down and arranged for his Glasgow return. However, the story of Sandy McMahon is surely the most bizarre and exciting of all these tales. Sandy McMahon was one of the most significant early Celts, part of multiple early triumphs and milestones, including the club's first Scottish Cup win when he scored twice, and the maiden league title when he finished the season as top scorer. The Selkirk-born forward arrived at Celtic in 1890. He had made the move from Edinburgh, where he'd played for sides such as Hibs and Leith Harp. As a consequence of his goal-scoring prowess, McMahon, who was widely known as the Duke, soon became a fan favourite and first-choice pick for each week's Celtic 11. He would ultimately spend 13 years at Celtic Park, bringing his time at Parkhead to an end in 1903, before a brief foray with Partick Thistle. But in the summer of 1892, it seemed that he was no longer to wear Celtic's green and white stripes. Season 1891-92 had been the boys' most successful to date, as they claimed a holy trinity of trophies: the Scottish Cup, Glasgow Cup and Charity Cup. McMahon's goals and performances in these matches had attracted the attentions of English scouts. They had an advantage in recruiting players from Scotland, as they could officially pay players, whereas this was outlawed in Scotland. Given the short nature of footballing careers, McMahon's head was undoubtedly turned by the prospect of good wages south of the border. And he wasn't the only one. Neil McCallum, another boys' hero and scorer of the club's first ever goal, was also a wanted man. In the case of both forward players, it was Nottingham Forest who were most keen to sign them. At this point, fighting began between the two clubs, so much so that there was public arguments between Celtic and Forest, leading to the English team making the two players write letters to Scottish sporting magazines confirming that they were moving south. In August 1892, the Scottish sport publication printed a letter that read, "Dear Sir, we beg to inform you that we have left the Celtic Club and have signed for Notts Forest on a legal agreement. We have left to improve our position. Yours truly, Alex McMahon, Neil McCallum." After this, Celtic's first act was to look inside the club for a negative influence. One newspaper report claimed that the Celtic committee believed the boys' camp contained a traitor who had helped facilitate this English move. Worse than that, the treacherous Celt, who was unnamed, was understood to have taken money from an English agent in doing so. In fairness to that English agent, it often took genuine bravery to make approaches to Scottish players and club officials. It wasn't unknown for violent mobs of fans, sometimes nicknamed vigilance committees, to attack anyone who was believed to be trying to recruit their star players. Celtic now stepped into action to bring home their prodigal son, although another Scottish paper, the Scottish Referee, published a cartoon purporting to show both men buying only one-way train tickets to Nottingham. The Celts' first step was to set up a hunting party, and soon they were off in pursuit of McMahon, although not McCallum, who in fact was believed by some to have been the man the boys blamed for the Duke's departure. There's been some debate about the identity of this hunting group, although it certainly included McMahon's brother, and also possibly Mick Dunbar, a Celtic player and later board member. Other possible people that were named were Joe Shaughnessy and David Meekleham. Celtic let slip that they believe McMahon was being hidden in London, and that's where their men would head. However, in fact, they were going to Nottingham. There was some suggestions that the boys had been given local help to find Sandy McMahon, from none other than Notts County, Forest's local rivals. The Scottish Sport reported that scarcely a day passed last week, but Celtic had voluntary messages from Nottingham giving news of the runaways. It was obvious that County would not want to see their near neighbours sign a prolific forward in the form of McMahon, and this may be why they helped the Celts track down their wayward player. And of course, it might be simply coincidence that later that season Celtic invited Notts County to Glasgow to play in a money-spinning friendly. One Sunday in August 1892, McMahon was in Nottingham. He had wanted to go to church, but the men from the Forest Committee, smelling a rat in the words of one journalist, worried he might not return, so he was instead taken for a drive. The next day, he was out for a walk with Neil McCallum and Alexander Barber, another former Renton player. During this stroll, the three footballers met Celtic's hunting party. Neil McCallum stepped forward at this point to insist that neither of them would return to Glasgow. However, Celtic's first ever goalscorer was told that he wasn't actually wanted. It was only McMahon, and Sandy was eventually persuaded to leave. Then arose the problem of transport. The Celtic group tried to hail a cab. They found one, but when they got in, McCallum threatened the driver, suggesting that he would face problems if people found out that he had taken away a potential star for Forest. The driver decided to choose an easy life and left without any passengers. The next step for the Celts was to make a run for it, leaving the other two Scottish players behind. Eventually, McMahon and the others found a pub where they were able to get a room to stay for the night. Their plan was to travel to Manchester the following day, from where they would get a train back to Glasgow. But this wouldn't be a simple task. They were warned that a group of Forest Committee men were waiting for them in Manchester, hoping to steal back their McMahon prize. Somehow, the Celts managed to evade capture and caught the train back to Scotland. Even then, they were still worried about capture. As a result, they got off the train one stop early at Eglinton Street Station in case any Forest representatives were waiting for them in Glasgow's main station. The Celts then instructed McMahon to write to Forest, confirming that he would not in fact be joining them. He sent a letter to the English team thanking them for their hospitality during his visit, but added that, "I'm home and I've come to stay." Forest's loss in this strange tale was Celtic's benefit. As the season progressed, the Duke would finish top scorer and claim the boys' first league title. It wasn't just Celtic that celebrated McMahon's return either. Many Scots had grown tired of the country's best players being poached by English sides, and so they were amused at Celtic managing to do the same to Forest. A Scottish referee comment congratulated Celtic on their success with McMahon. The newspaper noted that English journalists were complaining about Celtic's actions, protesting that Scottish clubs should not be allowed to act like this. But the Scottish referee's retort was simple: neither can Englishmen. Another prominent Scottish magazine, the Scottish Sport, offered similar sentiments, writing that Nottingham Forest have been bitten very severely, and it is a lesson to them, as well as other English clubs, not to tamper with Celtic players. Of course, all this raised perhaps legitimate questions about how McMahon had been persuaded to return. Despite rules outlawing payments of players in Scotland, it seems clear that Celtic were breaking these instructions, as was commonly done by many other sides. In fact, years later, Willie Maley wrote in his book that he believed all major clubs in Scotland defied the payment rule, except Queen's Park. From 1893, the issue of illegal payments and claims of kidnapping came to an end because Scotland introduced a professional system, allowing Scottish teams to officially sign and pay players. It was a move largely engineered by Celtic, particularly founding father John H. McLaughlin. The story of Sandy McMahon and his kidnapping is quite the tale, one that wouldn't seem out of place in a John le Carré or Graham Greene spy novel. It also shows just how different the 1890s football is from the modern era. Although perhaps it could yet give the Celtic board some ideas. If we can't afford to sign some of Europe's elite players, maybe there's more nefarious methods that can be used to secure their signature. If you want to learn more about Celtic's history, follow Hail Hail History on Twitter X. You can also take part in a free Celtic history walking tour. Visit celticwalkingtours.wordpress.com for more details.